Um, so when I have when I judge competitions and there's not a theme, I always tell people, those of you that submitted wildlife images, you're going to get a little harder critique than someone who submits, portraits or human interest type images. But all of these images are wildlife, so hopefully you'll get a little bit more insight into what I'm thinking when I look at these images. But you're getting, probably my harshest or more thorough critique of them. But having said that, at the same time, this is just my opinion. For me, and this is something that I talk about a lot in my workshops, is, the only person that you have to satisfy with this image is yourself. It's great to get validation from other people, and it's great to get feedback from someone who does this for a living. But at the end of the day, really, this is just one person's opinion. It's my opinion and my thought process as I look at an image. So most important is, what does this image do for you? Oftentimes when we make these images, we have, a personal or emotional connection to the image that we made that, not everybody else has. So you may have an image that to you is the best image you've ever made, but for someone who is critiquing it on a technical and creative aspect, they may not have that same emotional connection to that image. So it may not have that same impact on them. So just keep that in mind as we go through this images. So through all of these images. Okay. Having gotten that out of the way, let me share. Okay, can you guys see the images now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving you the score that I gave it. Well, actually, I'll give you the critique first, and then I'll give you the score for a particular image. And this looks like a beautiful sunrise elk shot. I think that's what's called sunrise elk. And this image has a lot of great elements that make a great landscape or wildlife, photo. This is what I call, animals or wildlife in the landscape. So it's lots of layers, lots of interest. However, from a wildlife perspective, it's a little busy. There's nothing that's really catching my eye that's drawing me into the image itself. Yes, we do have all these elk in the background, or, they could be deer. We're not exactly sure. There's quite a few collisions with some of these, especially these guys here in the middle. So while, technically it's a great image, from a technical perspective, it's a composition perspective is great. From an impact perspective, I think it lacks a little bit of punch that, makes me want to look at the image and draw me in. So I gave this image a 7. Eye of the Bison, beautiful image. And this is something, I've been leading workshops in Yellowstone. This was my 19th winter season in Yellowstone, leading workshops there. And, I still don't get tired of shooting bison. There's something about bison. And these images where we're kind of taking a small aspect of that bison and zooming in on them can be very compelling. However, from a technical and compositional perspective, having that eye in the center makes the image pretty static in my eye. My vision gets drawn to the eye and kind of gets stuck in that eye, doesn't circle around the image, doesn't give me a lot of room to go in. I would have much rather have preferred to have that special place of interest set to one of the PowerPoints on an image. And the PowerPoints, is hopefully everybody knows, are the intersections of the rule of thirds, those 4 points on the image where the rule of thirds, the tic-tac-toe grid intersects. Also in this image, I think I would have preferred also to have it as a vertical, including the entirety of that horn. Being able to see that big bull horn on this bison, I think it's very important. And I know this is a bull. I hope everybody knows, especially living in Jackson, how to tell the difference between the bulls and the cows. And it's usually, you can tell by the base, the size of the base of the horn. If the base of the horn is bigger than the eye, it's usually a bull. If the base of the horn is about the size of the eye, it's a cow. So I really would have preferred to see this more in a vertical format, so I could see that big horn, which is a big part of the bison, and maybe not put it so much in the center. Come up with a different composition. So this is a 7. Another bison here, kind of interesting. Now we have a little bit of movement and action. But again, just like the previous one, the image is centered, which, doesn't provide for a lot of room for our eyes to travel around the image and look at different aspects of the image. Our eyes kind of get stuck in the middle. And even though there's this action happening there, the image feels very static. Oftentimes, by putting your subject off to one of the, following the rule of thirds, off to one of the sides or one of the lower quadrants of the image, will make the image feel a lot more dynamic and a lot more movement in the image. I also think that there's not a lot of contrast between the water and our subject. So our water is really obscuring, pretty critical parts of our subject. We can see the head and we can see the horns, but we can't see the bottom part of our subject. So to me, it doesn't have that impact, doesn't grab me, doesn't allow me to look more into my subject and really get a feeling as to what it is that I'm looking at. So I give this one a 5. Great gray owl in a beautiful setting. And, there's quite a bit of impact in this image. I like the fact that we can see the eyes, which is incredibly important, being able to clearly see, especially for great gray owls that have these beautiful, just like great horned owls, these beautiful yellow eyes that really captivate us and make us want to look into them. The image is very nice and sharp. I do like the composition and the balance of the image. It's kind of a little more centered than I like it to be. I would rather have it be a little bit more off to the side to create a much more dynamic image. But I think that it still works. I would have preferred to see those eyes looking straight at me as opposed to looking to the side. But, sometimes we grab what we can get. Very nicely and sharp. I also would have liked to have seen a little bit more separation between the owl and that lodgepole pine on the right, along this edge right here, to give me a little bit more separation and be able to see my subject a little bit more clearly. And that could have easily been done by taking a few steps to the right. What that may have done is, put this branch that's in the foreground kind of in front of our subject. So maybe you'd have to take a few more steps to the right to be able to clear that obstruction out of the way. But having that separation between your subject and its environment and its background is going to really allow me to, get a better view, get a better feeling as to the subject that I'm looking at. I give this image a 7. This is kind of neat and actually a pretty difficult image to capture. We have a what looks like a bee of some kind, kind of moving from flower to flower. In flight, coming straight at us. Now, one of the aspects of this kind of photography, macro photography, is our depth of field is so shallow. And we can see here that the proboscis is pretty sharp, but our eyes are out of focus. And this is one of the tenets of wildlife photography. We got to make sure that our eyes are in focus, because that's how we connect with the subject. That's one of the things that allows us to really connect with the images and draws us in. So I would have liked to see an image where I can see those eyes, even though these are compound eyes. We don't connect to them the same way we connect with regular eyes, but still having that connection with the eyes is really important. The other thing is the crop. We crop some of the wings at the top. I would have also liked to see my subject in its entirety. But this is a very challenging image to make, obviously, capturing an insect in flight, especially with that shallow depth of field that we have when we're shooting macro. So I gave this one a 6. Beautiful Harlequin ducks. I love the background I love the flow of the water. I think that this composition is beautiful. See how we have our subject a little bit to the left, giving us some movement in the image. A lot makes the image that much more dynamic. It allows for our eyes to wander a little bit more and capture this rich, beautiful water and the lines and the movement that's in the background. The challenge here, even though we have this male, beautiful looking at us, so we can see a lot of the detail, we have the female in the background that has its head is back. We can't see the head. And we have some collisions between our main subject and that female that's in the background. So we kind of lose definition on our subject. Again, oftentimes with wildlife, we take what we can get. But I think this image would have been a lot stronger had we had just the one subject, the male harlequin, or being able to get that separation between our subjects and also have a connection with that female in the background. I gave this image a 7. Beautiful grizzly, nice and big, and Denali it looks like. So I think that this image, there's a couple of things I want to comment about the image. One is, got to pay attention to our borders. We have a lot of space here at the top that, it is not really adding a lot to my frame. We are getting this nice color that's there, but we don't have to have about half of the frame on that foliage. Really, our focus should be our bear in the foreground. And instead of having this much space at the top, I would have given myself a little bit more space at the bottom to give more space for our subject to be grounded. Right now, this border is uncomfortably close. If you were to print this and then mat it, the mat would get it really close onto the bottom of this frame, and you wouldn't see so much of that foreground. Or the soil that's in the bottom of the frame. So give yourself a little bit more room at the bottom, a little less than at the top, because you don't need to have all of that foliage in the background. You need enough to give a feeling of environment, a feeling of place, but we want to draw our viewers' attention to our main subject, which is the bear. Also, I think that the processing, it's a little washed out. You could bring in a little bit more contrast into the image and give us a little bit more feeling of place and color by bringing a little bit more contrast onto this image. And I gave this image a 6. Beautiful bears, beautiful bear play. I love this interaction between the mother and its cub. It's always great to get some interaction. Oftentimes when we're photographing wildlife, we shoot wildlife where it's kind of more static. However, one of the things we always want to be doing when we're shooting wildlife is try to shoot wildlife at least at eye level, if not just slightly below. In this image, I feel like I'm kind of shooting down our subject a little bit. We're kind of above our subject. So I would have tried to get a little lower, maybe sit down on the ground, get as low as possible to get a more eye-to-eye perspective on both the sow and the cub as well. And also what that would have done as well is give you a little better background. Right now, our background is kind of uniform across the entire frame. Being able to get it lower, you may have been able to get some foliage in the background, which could give you a little bit more contrast, or some water or some mountains if they were there, to give you a more separation between your subject and its environment and its background. So, try to get a little lower and try to include those faraway backgrounds to give you a more out of focus background and make your image stand out even more. This is an 8. Beautiful hummingbird nest. These guys are absolutely gorgeous. I love photographing hummingbird nests. I spent one summer almost only shooting hummingbirds and tracking hummingbird nests in my backyard. And I know how hard they are find and oftentimes photograph. They're oftentimes really high up in trees, depending on the species. Again, one of the things that I'm looking at this image that I find a little bit distracting, that is the fact that we have our subject dead center in the image. There's no reason to have all this dead space down here on the lower left. If you were able to crop this or even photograph it even better, where you have this nest a little bit further to the left and lower in the frame around that PowerPoint, somewhere around this area here, it would have given you a better composition, would have made the image flow a little more. Right now, even though you have all these beautiful leading lines, our eyes get stuck kind of in that nest, which are works of art. The nests of hummingbirds are incredible, beautiful, made of lichen and spiderweb silk. But the fact that it's in the center makes the image feel a little static. And I think that if you had put it in, you composed it a little better, it would have been a much stronger image. I gave this one a 7. Another macro shot, the beautiful depth of field and nice background. I love the fact that the image is really deep in focus. Hopefully, my guess is this was done either focus stacking or very small aperture with a V that was still, kind of frozen from the evening coolness. So I love the depth of field. I find it a little bit disconcerting, the fact that it's looking down, and also that we have our subject so close, the antenna of our subject so close to the edge of the frame down at the bottom. I would, in this case, give yourself a little bit more room, a little bit more breathing room. Move your subject again away from the center, a little bit to one of the sides, to give yourself a little bit more room and more room for our eyes to wander. But I love the detail and the sharpness of this image. I give this one a 6. River otter, I love photographing these guys in the winter in Yellowstone, especially. It's one of my favorite subjects to photograph. But in looking at this image, I like the composition, but there's a couple of challenges here. First, it doesn't seem that the otter is in focus. It looks like the focus is just behind the otter and this snow in the background. So our otter is just a tad soft. And also, again, we're looking down at our subject. And sometimes, again, you take what you can get. But oftentimes what I find is if I'm able to, I will try to get down lower, get down on that embankment and move down onto that snow and try to get as low as you can to your subject, get closer to that eye level. I gave this image a 6. I love this action. I love the this coyote howling in this sort of stark landscape. Couple things, couple suggestions that I would give to this image. I love the fact that you put your subject kind of in the in that third of the frame, the right third of the frame. One of the things that I find with square crops or one-to-one crops is that, again, makes the image a little bit more static. This image, I think, would do much better if you did a more panoramic crop, meaning you cut in a little bit of the sky at the top. You don't need all this sky because, again, you want to draw in your attention to your subject. This sky and the snow are secondary actors into the scene. Your primary actor, that's where you want to focus the attention of your viewer. So by cropping in a little bit at the top, you are able to then focus in closer onto your subject, get more detail on your subject. And then maybe, you don't necessarily need to crop from the bottom. I think you have good spacing at the bottom, but I would try to get rid of this little piece of grass that's there. Because to me, this image, conveys a sense of solitude. And so I want to make sure that the image is clean and as pure as possible. And that coyote howling with just a little bit of snow and, a little bit of foliage that's peeking through is absolutely incredible. But work on that cropping a little bit more, make the image a little bit more dynamic. I gave this image an 8. This looks like a portrait photo, and I see that the name here is Bear Graduation Photo. Seems like a senior portrait, if you ask me, of this bear with the little crocus in the foreground and the rocks that are set up there with moss. It just looks absolutely stunning. It looks like something that was posed. And I love the fact that you have that nice background with the gnarly tree, giving you kind of sense of place and something, a point of interest in the background. But again, I think that, we are a little too tight here. If I were to print this, I would be encroaching really on the rump of our subject. I want to be able to have a little bit more room for us to look into. The fact that this guy is, the face, it's on that third right of the image, I think works really well. But give yourself a little bit more room on the left-hand side. I think that, the tendency for a lot of people is to either get too close and not give enough room to breathe, or not get close enough. There's kind of a happy medium there that we need to find to have good impact, but also make the image flow. And I think here we're a tiny bit too tight on this image. I gave this image a 7. And these look like trumpeter swans, if I'm not mistaken. One of my favorite subjects to shoot in the winter. One of the challenges with this image, I love the fact that, I think your cropping is great. I think that creating that panoramic image gives you a more sense of motion in the image. We have more room in the front than in the rear, which also is great for providing a sense of place for our subjects to go into. We have 2 different wing positions, which is also great when you have subjects, and we have 3 subjects, which is the rule of odds, also works really well. However, one of the challenges that we have here is that we have this collision between these 2 subjects, which doesn't allow for separation and doesn't allow us to get a good sense of both of those subjects independently. It's kind of like you don't know where one subject begins and one subject ends. So we always want to be looking for that separation. There's a little bit of collision here as well with this swan and the foliage in the background, but that's something that could be remedied pretty easily. But these 2 guys over here being on top of each other, to me, is a little bit too distracting. I give this image a 6. Beautiful image of the ibis. And this is, I've talked a lot about, following that rule of thirds, and, the rules are there to be broken, but break them when it makes a lot of sense to break them. And in this image, we have a subject that's absolutely spectacular. The way the light is hitting the wings, giving you all these different colors. There's a reason why these are called ibis, glossy ibises, because they're absolutely beautiful. The way that you got the iridescence of the feathers, and you have such a strong subject here that this one does warrant putting it dead center. You have these absolutely beautiful layers in the background. Your position of the bird is absolutely perfect. The face and the main body of the bird is not straddling the different parts of that background. So, I mean, I think that this image is, absolutely perfect in the way that you were able to capture it. The light is beautiful. You got the wings spread out, and you have them at an angle, so you can see all that beautiful color on those feathers. I gave this image a 9. I like the setting of this image, and I like the composition. I like the fact that you have the image a little bit, the center, or what I call the center of gravity or subjects, a little bit to the right. But if you notice, when you look at this image closely, our focus point is the nose. We have our nose nice and sharp, but the eyes are out of focus. And that's sort of a cardinal sin in wildlife photography. You want those eyes to always be in focus, even if that's now, if that nose may be a little bit out of focus, but because we make that connection with our subjects via the eyes. So just make sure that you focus on those eyes every time. There's a reason why modern cameras nowadays have eye detection, right? It's because we want to have those eyes in focus. I give this one a 6. Beautiful fox, beautiful red fox. I think that the composition is beautiful. I like the background. I like the foreground. It looks like this fox is kind of inquisitive, looking, peering over some foliage to look at what's going on with the photographer. Kind of looking at us. It's not quite looking straight at us. It feels like it's looking over our shoulder to the right. And one of the things that I like to do images like this is bring in a little bit more highlight onto the eyes. You know, back in the day, we used to shoot a lot with flash to bring in a little bit of that catch light into the eyes and bring in a little bit of light into those eyes, which typically for most mammals will have a shadow on them because of the, you know, most mammals and birds of prey have a brow over their eyes, and the eyes tend to be a little darker than the rest of the image. Nowadays, as opposed to using a flash and carrying a flash out in the field, one of the things that we can do is bring out some detail in those eyes using post-processing. So I would try to bring a little bit of more light into those eyes so that we can make a better connection with our subject. But, you know, focus is straight on. We have a lot of depth of field here where we're getting the nose, the eyes, and the ears all in focus. Beautiful background. You know, I think that I would have liked to see maybe a little bit more environment of the shot. I think that would have made the image a little bit stronger. I gave this image a 7. And a snowy owl list off. I love snowy owls. Another of the species of owls that have the bright yellow eyes that allows us to have connection with our subjects. But a couple of challenges here. One is, you know, I love the action shot, the way the owl is, you know, starting to take off. But I think that our high key background is colliding a little bit too much with this right wing. We can't see where the white of the wing and the white of the background begins and ends. So this wing seems to be kind of merging into the background. We want to have that definition. You can see that we have the definition on the left wing, or our, you know, from our perspective, the left wing. We have good definition everywhere else in our subject except for this wing. So this is an area that I would work on in post-processing to bring out to make sure you have good definition of your entire subject. But I love the feet. I love the depth of field you have here. Everything is nicely captured. But this part of the top is a little bit too distracting for me, where I'm not seeing where my subject begins and where the background begins. I need a little bit more definition and separation there. I give this image a 7. Beautiful snowy owl portrait looking straight at you. You can see an immense amount of detail on this bird. Every single feather you can see and actually almost feel it. You get nice, beautiful separation between our subject and the background. It really allows us to connect with the subject, the way the subject is looking straight at us. I think I would have liked to see a little bit more of my subjects. You know, these kind of headshots are great, but doesn't give you a lot of sense of the animal itself. You know, we don't have a definition of the wings here. You know, I understand oftentimes I've shot snowy owls many times. And oftentimes you're out there in the winter, it's hard to get good backgrounds on them. You end up with snow as the background. But being able to, you know, create a sense of place for your subject, I think it's very important. I give this image an 8. Great capture, you know, with this. I assume this is a golden eagle flying straight into the camera. I like the wing poses. I call this one of the Batman poses for the birds. Looks like it's wrapping a cloak around it. I love the fact that we can see its talons, super sharp, beautiful light onto the face of the subject. Unfortunately, I feel that this line of in the fence post in the background are a little bit too distracting. They're competing for my attention as I look into my subject. Which is unfortunate because it's absolutely stunning image of this eagle coming straight at you. I would try to see if you have another image where you don't have this distracting element of these this fence post in the background. I understand that it's probably taking off from the fence post as it's coming towards us, but it just competes too much for my attention. I also would have provided, if you were going to leave this fence post in there, I would crop it more on the right and give yourself a little bit more room on the left. This bird is, although it's coming straight at us, it kind of seems that it's going a little bit to the left as well. So I want to provide more room on the left-hand side than on the right-hand side. All this negative space over here is not doing that much for my image. And I think that's one of the reasons why this fence figures so prominently in the frame and draw so much attention from us, from the viewers. So I give this image a 7. Snowy bison on the move, very nice capture. I think that there's too much in this image going on for my likes. I'd like to have a more a clear definition of what it is that I'm looking at. I keep looking at all these bison. I'm like, okay, is there a bison here that I should be focusing on? Is there not a bison that's doing something interesting? Is there a bison that's leading my group of bison, as they're moving across our prairie? So try to think in those terms as to, what about this image makes it so compelling? Is it because you have one bison that's leading the other bison, giving you a clue as to a behavior that the animals are exhibiting? Oftentimes, if we can't capture action, capturing behavior can make an image that much more interesting. For me, the 3 things that I'm looking for wildlife photography are going to be action, behavior, and environment. I wanted my images to have one of those 3 things if I can, or more, maybe multiple of those things. And those images are the ones that will end up having the most impact. So for me, this image, there's so much going on here. There's nothing that's drawing me in and making me focus on any one of my subjects. I gave this image a 7. Another frosty, and this is a combination, frosty and snowy bison. We have frost on the head and snow on the back. Pretty cool. I love the fact that we captured, this frosty tree on the top, and along the river over here. This is probably either the Madison, probably the Madison River. And in any case, one of the challenges that I have with this image, again, as we talked about earlier, is the fact that we are cropping it so close down to the bottom. One of the things that we want to do when we have a subject where we don't see the full extent of their legs, they're kind of hiding behind the snow like this, is we want to crop in such a way where our mind fills in the rest of our subject. So let's say that in this case, if we were able to remove the snow, we would see that we would be cropping the rear legs of our subject. And to me, that's a no-no. We want to be able to see all of the extremities of our subject. We don't want to cut them off. We don't want to cut them off the hooves, right? So here, it feels like you cut them off at the hooves. Again, the other challenge with that is that you just don't have a lot of space at the bottom. And yet you have a lot of space down here. So painting the camera a tiny bit down and giving yourself a little more space at the bottom would have made this image that much more, that much better. I gave this image an 8. Egret. So a couple of things for this image that I think are challenging when I look at this image. Again, we have a subject that's dead center in the frame. We want to provide room for subjects to move into, more so to more in the front than in the back. It does seem that it does have a little bit more in the front here than the back. But again, by putting our subjects dead center, unless there's something absolutely spectacular like we had with that ibis before, it makes the image kind of static. So keep that in mind. Try to get the image a little bit off, put your subjects more, you following the rule of thirds. Couple of things, your exposure seems to be a little off. We lost all the detail on the head and on the wings over here. This is totally pure white. And it may be that you do have the detail there and you need to recover it in Lightroom or Photoshop, whichever tool you're using. So make sure that you don't get these blown out areas, because those just seem like white blobs. We're not seeing a lot of texture and detail there that we want to see in these images. Also, if you look closely, we have a blue cast on this image. These egrets, these great egrets, are beautifully white. And as I look at this egret, is blue. There's a blue cast to it. So make sure that you remove that blue cast and give us a white egret, which is what we see out there. I give this image a 5. Beautiful action. I love the fact that we can see both eyes of this great blue heron, as well as its prey, the fish that's in there. I like the way the light is coming in. I would have preferred the light be a little bit more at a better angle. Right now, it looks like it's coming straight from the right-hand side. Again, we take what we can get. We can't direct the heron to look this way we want him to look. But that oftentimes will make the difference. We see all this shadow back here on the back of the bird, which is drawing our attention in as we look at the brighter parts of the image. So I would like to see a little bit more shadow recovery, being able to see a little bit more detail into those shadows, and perhaps a little bit more contrast and saturation of the image. These guys are absolutely beautiful. The blues on them are beautiful. And in this image, the blues are kind of a little bit muddied. We see them as more steely gray than the blues. There's a reason they go great blue herons, and this doesn't have that much blue as I'd like to see on this image. I gave this image a 6. I love the eye contact of these kits and the vixen that's with them. Lots of great attention. Again, I feel like I'm looking down at our subjects. I want to be able to get down low and get more eye level with our subjects as much as we can. You got great depth of field here. We have great connection with our subjects. Again, here we have a lot of space down here at the bottom that's not really doing all that much for us. And we are kind of, a little close near the top of this frame. So being able to see a little bit more of the top, give yourself more room for this vixen that's up here. And we don't need to have all of this ground that's here. You could cut this, in half, basically between the tail of this third kit and the and the edge of the frame. Cut this in half and give me more room at the bottom. I'm not sure if you have that or not in the frame, or maybe in another image close to this one. I gave this image a 6. This is a very interesting and different perspective on this woodpecker. It's not oftentimes that you see this perspective, so it's a little strange as you're looking at it, but it's pretty cool on this. I think it's a sapsucker, if I'm not mistaken. But there's some elements in here that are distracting. To me, this I don't know what this is up here on the upper right-hand corner. We have this red board or slat down at the top and near the bottom that are just like drawing my attention away from my subject. Also, if you look down here, we also have a little bit of problem with that tail, those tail feathers being so close to the edge of the frame. I like the unusual composition, but I think it's a little too tight on our subject, and we have so many elements in here that are distracting. But I think that the fact that you had a pretty interesting perspective on a subject makes it a little bit more interesting and makes me think about what it is I'm looking at. Typically, I can pick out woodpecker species pretty quickly. And it took me a little while to figure out what this was. I gave this image a 6. This looks like a beautiful tern coming in to catch some dinner. Looks like it got 2 fish on it. But to me, again, this is an image where there's so much going on. I'm not sure where it is that I'm supposed to be looking at. I think that the fact that we have this splash, which I'm assuming is the splash from the tern that came in to catch those little fish, they left behind in its wake. The fact that it's in the center, to me, it's dominating the image, and it's detracting from what really needs to be our subject, which is the tern with the fish on it. So I would crop this very differently. I would crop in on the right-hand side, put the splash, not so much in the center, that's grabbing so much my attention, but put it closer to the edge on the left, on the right-hand side, and then give more space for your subject to fly into. And I think that that may become a much stronger image if you're able to crop it in, maybe somewhere around here, and maybe a little bit from the top to maintain that aspect ratio. Oftentimes, one of the things that I notice a lot of people doing is because you have this reflection, people feel that you need to include the entire reflection. And if you can, absolutely keep it. But if it makes it more compositionally attractive to cut a little bit of that reflection off, I think that that's okay. And I think in this instance, as I crop this image on the right some to put this splash more on the right and put more attention on the tern, which should be our subject, I may need to cut in a little bit down here as I crop it, which I think it's okay. Again, to me, the main subject is our tern, not the splash. In this image, it looks like the splash is our main subject and the tern is the secondary subject. I give this image a 6. Nice little Hummer silhouette, and beautiful background. I think that I would have positioned myself a little bit differently so you don't have this horizon line cutting right across our subject. There's such a distinct horizon line here between the sky and the mountains that horizon line is really, I think, interfering with our subject. I would have liked to have seen that a little further up or maybe a little further down where our hummingbird is entirely in this middle section of our landscape. And I think that would have made it a little bit more attractive. Right now, this line, unfortunately, is so distracting from our subject that it makes it a little bit hard to focus on what should be a brilliant capture of the silhouette of this hummingbird at a feeder. I gave this image a 6. Very cool porcupine climbing up a tree. I love the expression on the porcupine. Unfortunately, we have this sort of really bright background here that's kind of distracting us. So I would try to limit that a little bit as much as you can, especially around the face. See how this is so bright, it's almost overexposed, and we have a lot of purple fringing going on in this image, which is a little bit distracting. Again, you're also cropping in super tight. I would give yourself a little bit more room, at the bottom and at the top. Yes, we want to focus on our subject, but we don't want to crowd our subjects. And I feel like our subject is a little bit crowded here. Also, I don't feel that you need this much of the bark of the tree. The bark is interesting, but again, our main subject is the porcupine. Don't allow this secondary actor in our scene to have as much room or as much attention as our primary actor. I would crop that in a little bit, make this image more of a vertical, then closer to the square that it is now. You don't need to have this much of the tree. We know what the tree is. We know what the tree looks like. we want more attention and see more about our subject, which is the porcupine. I gave this image a 6. Beautiful, beautiful capture. Some kind of deer, not exactly sure which kind of deer, probably a young buck growing in some antlers in there. And I love the title of this, Maybelline, because of the eyelashes. I like the composition. I like the background as well. The fact that you have this out of focus grasses, I think make this image absolutely beautiful with that shallow depth of field. Yet we have enough depth of field to see the eyes and the ears in focus. We have the snout a little bit out of focus, but I think that works really well because our attention is really drawn towards the eye of our subject. I think you could have done a little better with your processing to bring a little bit more color into both our subject and the background. You have some beautiful colors back here that I feel are a little muted. So I think you could process this a little bit better and that you will have a little bit more contrast and a little bit more color, giving you a little bit more punch. But I like your composition. I like your depth of field. I like the way your subject is looking straight at us. I gave this image a 6. Beautiful pronghorn. I love pronghorns. I love photographing pronghorn. And this is something you don't see incredibly often. Pronghorn try to avoid going through deep snow. They don't like the snow. They don't like digging through the snow to get at the food that they're eating. So it's kind of unusual to see them, crossing in large groups like this through that much snow. The biggest issue I have with this image is that our subjects are all running away from us. And it's something that we do quite often is we're tracking our subjects that they're moving from left to right and start running away from us. We keep pressing that shutter. And one of the things I talk about a lot in my workshops is no butt shots. To me, as soon as a subject passes that 90-degree angle from you, it's time to stop shooting. It's time to stop pressing that shutter, because 99% of the time, subjects running away from you are really not all that attractive. You want subjects that are running towards you, coming towards you, to be able to see them, have that connection with their eyes. All of these subjects seem to be looking away. We also have a lot of subjects here that are distracting. Our main subject, which is the one that we can see most clearly, the one that's in focus, is this one. But we have all these subjects in the background that are vying for our attention. So I would try to find an image that's a little simpler, a little cleaner, easier to look at. This is a 6. Close-up of a moose. And these guys, they're hard to photograph, just like bison. Getting the richness of the dark fur against the snow can be very challenging. The dynamic range is so big. So that's why it's usually easier and better to photograph them in softer light, diffuse light, versus, direct light on them. So that's always a challenge. And it looks like you did pretty well here, keeping your whites nice and white and being able to bring some detail on the fur of our subject. But again, like some of the other images that we talked about, I feel that we are so close, so tied into this subject, that it's not really giving me a lot of room to breathe and not giving the subject a lot of room to move into. I want to be able to see more room on the left side of our subject, the way that they're looking, to make the image that much more dynamic. I gave this image a 6. Beautiful bighorn sheep. I love the background. I think the background really makes, these horns stand out. You have a great depth of field. We have sharpness right from the snout all the way to the ears and all around on the horns. And we can see all of the fraying that's taking place at the end of the horns, which happens quite often with these guys. We can make a connection with our eye on the subject on this left eye. We kind of lost this right eye a little bit, but I still think that it's a beautiful image, especially with that background that really brings out our subject and makes us kind of almost feel that fur. really gives us that three-dimensional look. It gives you nice depth of field by having that background out of focus. And again, this subject, even though it's centered, it's impressive and beautiful, and there's so much detail there that it's okay for it to be centered. I think that this image could work very well both centered or with more room on the right to allow our subject to look into. Beautiful capture. I love this image. This is a 9. Oh, beautiful bear cub with these berries. I love the fact that we can see so much detail in the fur of this wet bear, which is absolutely gorgeous. We can see all of these, claws, we see how sharp and beautiful they are. Beautiful color on the berries. We have a beautiful diagonal happening in the image, which, is always a plus because it guides our eye to look at different parts of the image. Beautiful depth of field. We see so much detail on the bear, yet we have this area in the background, which is nicely out of focus, and beautiful light. Really nice capture. This is another 9. Nice red fox doing its mousing. Kind of, it looks like pretty hard snow, so it wasn't able to get very deep in there. That must have hurt a little bit as it was jumping. And it's a great thing to capture. Oftentimes, this is one of the things that most people on the workshops that I lead in Yellowstone, one of the things that the top things that people want to capture is a mousing fox. It's kind of hard to find and hard to photograph. It's not a commonplace sight. And oftentimes when it does happen, the fox is, according to Murphy's Law, is jumping away from you as opposed to jumping perpendicular to you to be able to capture those incredible jumping fox images. However, in this image, there's so much going on in the background that it makes it really distracting and kind of difficult to figure out what's going on here. This almost looks like an accident. It doesn't look like this is a deliberate effort. Part of it is because of the angle and the position of our subject, but also because of the snow where it is and because of what's going on in the background. I think the background is a little bit too distracting for this image to work. And also, if you notice, our subject is going to the left, and we have much more room on the right than we do on the left. Again, making the image a little bit, give you a sense of that it's a tense environment. It doesn't give you a sense of movement and a sense of peace. It looks like this fox met the end of the road. And I guess just like the title, it had a face plant on the snow. I gave this image a 7. Love this interaction of the bear cubs with the sow. Absolutely beautiful. I think that a couple of comments that, when submitting images to competition, it's better to provide a bigger image, larger image than a smaller image. It's hard to see all the detail in an image that's this small. So try to provide an image that's a little bigger than this. I love the interaction here that's going on with the cubs and the mom. I love the grasses in the foreground. Again, I think I would have tried to include a little bit more of the environment. So maybe perhaps not getting so tight onto the frame, provide a little bit of background, especially behind. And I would also crop this, with more space on the left than on the right. Right now, it's kind of equidistant, and our sow is kind of looking to the left. That's why I would prefer to have more room to the left than to the right. So think about the position and the way that your subjects are looking when you're trying to compose an image, or you're trying to compose after the fact by cropping. I gave this image an 8. Again, interaction. Remember, I talked earlier some of the things that I'm looking at, which are, action, interaction, or behavior, and environment. And this image kind of has a lot of those, takes a lot of those boxes in there. We have this loon adult feeding its chick, nice down at almost water level, which is giving us a great view of our subjects. It's not looking down at them. We can see detail on this little crawfish that's being handed over to the chick. We can see a lot of detail on the adult. The only thing that I would change about this image is this little piece of, I'm assuming it's its legs in the background. It's a little bit distracting. So I would either clone that out or crop it in so that you don't have that little bit of pink on the back of the adult loon. But the fact that we have so much detail on the chick, I think I would have liked to have seen this image a little less tight than we're seeing it here. Basically zoom out a little bit more, give me a little bit more of the environment. Being able to see the chick in its entirety with its downy feathers would have been great as well. I give this image a 9. And, you know, this is a beautiful image of a cow moose. But again, I think that we're not seeing a lot of our subject. We have our subject looking straight at us. You know, oftentimes when I'm photographing wildlife, I like to have that wildlife as close to 45-degree angles from me. And the reason I'm looking at closer to 45-degree angle or more, 45-degree angle to 90, is because I can see more of our subject. I can see the shape of our subject. I can see, if it's a bird, I can see its wings. If it's a mammal, I can see its tail. I can see its legs. So I'm always looking more for a 45-degree angle. Also, some of these subjects that have eyes on the sides kind of become a little bit more difficult to make that connection with them because the eyes kind of get lost in the background. The background here is also kind of bright. I would try to tone down the background a little bit so that you have more, your viewer is more drawn towards your subject. Our eyes are always drawn to the brightest parts of the image. And this background and this tree, this aspen tree in the background over here is really what's tugging at my attention, and my eyes wants to veer towards those. So think about how you can tone down that background to bring your subject and make it that much more compelling in the frame. And I give this image a 7. And David, I think that's it for level 1 images. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so that's all the level 1s. If you guys have maybe a quick question before we get to the level 2s. And we're going to do the winners for both levels at the end. So we can take a minute or two for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
So yeah, I was wondering, you know, is the level of detail and is that what people are looking for? Is there something else that people are looking to get?
David?
Yes.
I didn't hear all the beginning, but what is the highest score possible?
A 9.
Okay.
So yeah, basically between a 3 and a 9. There's
In that scoring system, how do you spell that?
it's TIC. So,
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So it's 3 categories, a 1 to 3 possible for each technical, impact, and composition. So no other questions. We'll jump right into all the level 2 photographs.
I didn't have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you. This is really good.
Oh, great.
Glad to hear it.
Join us.
I feel like I'm learning a lot from the comments. Thank you.
That's great. That's excellent to hear. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get started here. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. Excellent. And so again, you know, if if you've stuck with us this far, you know that the things that I'm always looking for in an image and the things that really resonate when you look in this image is that interaction, always looking at the environment, looking at action or interaction, and behavior. So those are the things that I'm always looking for. And I think those are the things that make a more, the most compelling images. And I love this interaction here between, this calf and I presume it's mother, the cow that's with it. So I love that interaction. But again, as we talked earlier, I think that I would, looking at this image, we have the calf with its eyes closed and we have the cow with its eyes open. So I would tend to leave more room to the left of the frame than to the right of the frame, because we have one that's looking in that direction. Kind of makes me wonder, what is it that it's looking at? So I want to provide a little bit more room to that side. Having the willows here is helpful. It adds to the environment, but you don't need to have this much of the willows. You also, if you look closely up here, there's something that is obscuring the upper right-hand corner of the frame. So I would crop this image maybe right around here to provide a sense of environment, keep providing those willows as part of the frame, but that will provide a little bit more room to the left to provide more room for our main subject to look at. The fact that these eyes are closed on the calf doesn't bother me at all. I think it's part of the scene and gives you a little bit of a better feeling of interaction between the two subjects. It's like that young one is appreciating the hug that its mother is giving it. If both eyes were closed, I would say that would be, wouldn't be that great of an image. But the fact that we have the cow with its eyes open looking to the left really adds to the sense of interaction between both of our subjects. So I give this image an 8. So pretty cool composite. This is oftentimes not the easiest thing to do, but a couple of comments here. Again, I feel like I'm so tight in the frame that I'm gonna lose parts of my subject. So give yourself a little bit more room. Don't crop in so tight that you have just a sliver of space, the tips of the wings and our subject down here. There's so little space there. Also, the fact that we're seeing the rump of our birds, remember what I talked about earlier, is no butt shots. Try to keep those butt shots to a minimum. The butt shot really has to tell a story versus just having a butt shot for butt shot's sake. So try, butt shots tend not to be all that attractive and all that interesting. There's always exceptions to that rule, but those are few and far between. And also, I feel that the selection job that was done as you were creating this composite is a little too harsh. When you did this selection, you needed to add a little bit more feather to, I guess that's, feather is a technical term, not the feathers that we have on the eagle. You need to add a little bit more feathering to the selection so it doesn't feel like it's so much of a cutout as you're putting it into this blue sky. So look at your selection methods and try to create an image, a composite that doesn't feel as much of a cutout. I give this image a 6. This is great. This is, one of the things I really enjoy doing. Assuming this is probably somewhere in Alaska. I lead workshops to Katmai to shoot bears on the salmon run. So this is a scene that we photograph quite often. It's great that you were able to capture it with its salmon in its mouth and shaking. I love the water splashing. But I feel like, again, one of the things that we're looking for in wildlife is that connection with our subjects. And the fact that we have the salmon obscuring the eye, and there's so much going on here where we cannot make that connection with our subject, neither of our bear or the salmon itself, doesn't provide for that connection between the viewer and the subject in the frame. So I'm always looking for that, always looking for that connection, being able to see the eye of a subject. I give this image a 7. I love, again, the interaction and the action in this image, and the environment as well. I think, this takes a lot of all those boxes. Having that explosive water, having that connection with our subject, we have a connection with this, our bear on the right, because we can see, its eye a little bit, but we have a really strong connection with our bear on the left as it's chasing the bear on the right. And you have lots of depth of field here where you have both bears nicely with a lot of detail, which is absolutely awesome. And you have this background out of focus, which is giving you that sense of place. I love the interaction. But, sometimes the challenge is, how much depth of field you want. It's great having all this depth of field, but oftentimes it makes the image feel a little bit flat and a little bit like it was cut and paste. And I think in this image, to my liking, has maybe a little bit too much depth of field. I like to be able to see on the back of my subjects an area that's starting to fade out a little bit, so that gives you more, a 3D look, more dimensionality to our subjects. Nevertheless, absolutely beautiful capture. I love the interaction and I love the explosive water. The fact that we can see all these claws and they feel the fur on both of these boar, what I'm assuming are boar. They look like boar brown bears. I give this image an 8. Another image that takes a lot of boxes for me. We have, kind of bears in the environment. We have beautiful environment with the sand and with the grasses in the background and a little cub. And this is telling you a little bit of a story. This is earlier in the season when you're out, when the bears are feeding mostly on grasses and on the mud flats. And the cubs are really nice, really little, and they're more attached to their mothers. They need a lot more attention from the mothers. And I love this interaction between these two bears. There's lots of, a good enough depth of field here, but you can feel that you're starting to lose depth of field on this back end of our cubs. So giving you a feeling of depth and 3D-dimensionality to our cub and to our subjects. Same thing with this this paw over here and this paw over here. You can see that our plane of focus is where the eyes are of both of our subjects, but this paw that's in the foreground and this paw that's in the background has a little bit less sharpness to it because it's a little bit out of focus, giving you that sense of depth and dimension to our subjects. Absolutely love this image. I think the sense of place, like I said before, the environment and in the interaction and the behavior, all those boxes that are ticked on this image. I give this one a 9. This Osprey, I love the sunset and the Osprey. I think one of the challenges with this image is that you probably had to bring in a lot of shadow onto our subject, and that gave you all that purple fringing on the edges of the Osprey. So that's something you want to look for and avoid and try to correct. And Lightroom and Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw has tools to try to correct some of that fringing that's happening there. The challenge that I have with this image, I love the colors of the sunset, but this is not something that even our eyes are capable of seeing. You don't see a subject like this that's backlit, perfectly exposed on the front as we're looking at it. This would be more of a silhouette. Even with our eyes, they have incredible dynamic range. So certainly a camera would never be able to capture, anything like this. And in nature, you wouldn't see this. So it feels a little bit artificial to me because you brought in so much detail onto that osprey. I would try to keep it more of a silhouette than it is to bring all that detail in. But I love the composition. I love that sunset. I would have tried to not bring in as much detail onto our subject and control that fringing, that purple fringing that you're seeing. I give this image a 7. Sandhill Cranes, and I love the pose that you were able to capture here. This is one of the things, especially when you have multiple subjects in the frame, birds, is try images that I feel are more compelling and have more of impact are those where all the wing positions are different on all the different birds, because it actually gives you kind of like a sequence, if you will, from the subjects. And the fact that these two have opposite wing positions and they're kind of interlocking with each other works extremely well. However, I sort of wonder why you kept this as a square crop. The square crop, as I mentioned earlier, kind of makes an image feel a little bit more static. I would like to give a little bit more room for subjects to fly into on the right-hand side. So think about that, giving your subjects room to fly into and not boxing them in and providing same amount of space on the front as you did in the back. I give this image a 7. I love this interaction. I think that this, the interaction between these two and the background, the position that you were at when you capture this, see how we're just below eye level on these subjects, I think allows for a much better interaction between the viewer and the subjects, which are these two brown bears on the coast there. But I think the processing you could have done a little better job on the processing. This image feels a little bit washed out. I'd like to see a little bit more detail and a little bit more color when we're there. This sky and this water has the potential to be a really nice blue and to contrast nicely with the browns and light browns of these bears. So think about your post-processing, how you post-process this image to give it a little bit more impact. Right now, it just feels like, these bears are kind of receding into that background and you don't get that sense of 3 dimensions because there's so little contrast between the bears and the background. So I would go back and, and do a little better job at processing and bringing out more detail, more color, and a little more impact on our subjects. But I love the interaction. I love the composition. And I love the pose of both of our subjects. So I gave this image a 7. Another great gray owl, beautiful, beautiful owls. I wonder the choice of making this a black and white. I oftentimes wonder why someone takes an image that could have a great impact, especially with these owls that have these bright yellow eyes that allows for that really deep connection between the viewer and the subject and turn it into black and white. I'm not saying that it's a bad choice, but I think that you losing some of that impact in the image by turning it into a black and white. The composition also, if you look what's happening here, we have a lot more room on the right than we have on the left, making this another square crop, kind of making the image a little more static and, not providing as much room for a subject to kind of look into. Yeah, subject is kind of looking towards us, but it's also looking to the left. So I want to provide more room on the left than I do on the right. I give this image a 7. Now, this is a hard image to look at, and something that not a lot of people would want to photograph or see or share. But it is a cycle of life. It's when you see this happening, one of the things people will get upset at the alligator, but you know what? The alligator needs to eat too, and it needs to provide for, it needs to raise chicks, needs to lay eggs. So it's just the way it is. Although we like the roseated spoonbills oftentimes a little bit better. I think this image has an insane amount of impact, and the cropping is beautiful. The composition is great in that you have our subject right here in this little window, nicely framed between the elements on the left and on the right, and lots of beautiful detail and nice composition. And, you know, talk about impact. This image has, you know, the most impact you could ever have on an image. I gave this image an 8. Another roseated spoonbill on family. This is absolutely stunning, beautiful. I love the color. I love the composition. There are a couple of things that I would do to improve this image. You know, this branch that's up here it's, you know, dangerously close to the top. I'm not someone to willy-nilly clone out elements in the image, but this image I think is so strong and so beautiful that this is an image I would work on trying to improve it a little bit and remove this branch that's at the top and perhaps this branch that's over here. The other thing that I would do is, again, looking at our subjects, they're all looking to the right, but we have more room on the left than we do on the right. I would crop this image so that we have more room on the right, more room where all of our subjects are looking into than on the left itself. This part here is not adding all that much to the frame. You know, our eyes really need to focus on these guys and provide a venue for them to look at. Absolutely stunning image that could be improved with just a few little edits. I give this image an 8. This is an amazing capture, being able to get, you know, having done these kinds of shots for many years, getting that salmon in the air, looking the right way, being chased by, you know, the brown bear behind it, is not something that you get every time. So, I mean, the talk about the size at the moment, absolutely beautiful, you know, capture. Cropping is great. You're shooting at eye level with our subject. We have nice background that gives you contrast and gives you, you know, that dimension into the image that we're looking at. We have eye contact with both the bear and the salmon, which is absolutely great. I think your processing could have been a little bit better. There's a lot of shadow areas here, especially around here, that's pure black, pure dark, that you could bring out some little bit of detail in that area. I think the contrast on the bear itself is probably a little bit too much. I would try to dial that contrast, down a little bit and bring some detail onto this paw as well as this chest area here, and try to bring a little bit more detail in there so we can see more of that bear, and also not have so much contrast in the middle part of the bear as well. Try to bring a little bit more detail into those shadows. The light was pretty soft here. We don't have very harsh light, so you should be able to bring that out in the image. I give this image an 8. I like the composition here. I like the diagonal lines that we have going on here with our bighorn sheep and in the environment. I think that we could bring in a little bit, make this image a little bit more punchy, give you a little bit more contrast, a little bit more color into it. I also would like to see maybe a crop that's a little tighter than this. Our subject, as you can see here, is taking less than a quarter of the entire frame. And this is our subject. It's the bighorn sheep ewe. So you want to be able to see it a little bit better. I would crop in a little tighter while still retaining those diagonal lines that you have with all the vegetation. I think the vegetation is beautiful and adds a lot of sense of place and environment. But I think we could see our subject a little bit better, have a little bit more detail on our subject, especially such beautiful subjects as the bighorn sheep. I give this image a 7. Yeah, this is, these guys are always pretty loud and gregarious. It seems that they have lots of family issues, fighting with each other. So it's easy and great to be able to capture really interesting behavior. But again, and it's a thing that I've talked a lot about during this image review or this competition, is looking at the flow of the image and providing room for our view and our viewers to move into. This image, the flow is from lower right to upper left. And we have all this space up here that's really not adding all that much to the scene. Yet we feel that, I feel that this, the sea lion is too close to this edge. I would prefer to have more room on the left because the action is going to the left. I want to follow my crop. I want to follow the action in my crop. So try to, maybe you do have another image that follows that a little bit better. Being able to have more space on the left and the right will make the image that much more dynamic. I give this image a 7. So another coyote, I love coyotes. They're beautiful. For a lot of people don't really care for coyotes all that much, but I love coyotes. I think they're absolutely beautiful. And, they're incredibly smart creatures and very adaptable to a lot of different environments. So for all those reasons and more, I love coyotes. There are a couple of things with this image that are really distracting to me, that are really detracting from our subject, which is the coyote, especially the snow down here. We have a large portion of our image of the snow that's completely blown out. There's absolutely no detail in the snow. And you want to have that detail. Our eyes are being dragged down to that part of the image because, again, our eyes are always drawn to the brightest part of the image. So being able to see that snow and seeing some detail there, I think it's crucial. And the fact that it's completely blown out is too distracting to the image, and not allowing us to really appreciate the subject that we're looking at. I give this image a 6. I love the high key treatment that you did to this image. I think that I like the high key on the background. I don't like so much the high key on the subject itself. I want to be able to really get this subject to stand out against its background so that I'm not, the sage brushes that are in the background are not merging in with my subject. I'm really creating a separation between our subject and its background. That's one of the reasons why you may want to create a high key image, is to increase that separation between your subject and its background. So I think you have potential here to bring that out a little bit and really highlight our subject and, highlight that beautiful rack of this bull elk that we're getting to see less and less of these guys in Yellowstone and the Tetons. In the last few years, we're seeing less and less of them. So I give this image a 7. Beautiful moose, beautiful reflection, beautiful setting. Again, this image, feels like a high key kind of image, not as high key as the previous one, but that's one of the things that a high key image allows us to do here, is really highlight our subject. We have lots of detail on the snow. In most places, it does feel like some detail was lost in some of these areas here. So make sure you probably have it still there. Try to bring out some of that detail in the snow, some of that texture. And I think the reflection works really nicely. The fact that you captured the action of that moose walking also adds to the frame so that it doesn't feel like it's just a moose standing in the snow. Nicely done. I give this image an 8. Good interaction between the bison, but I think again that it's a little too tight, cropped a little too tight on this image. I think you could have gone out a little bit more, include more of our subjects, include the horn on this cow, and on the, probably including a little bit of that the bottom of both the calf and the cow as well. Again, it just feels like I'm missing out on a lot of what's going on in the frame. Yes, the interaction is awesome and it's beautiful, but we want to be able to see more of our subject. Right here, we're kind of seeing this, this congruity here between the angle of the legs. We're just seeing two legs and the way the head is curving out. I'm assuming that the front leg, these are the rear legs. The front legs are over here out of the frame. But it does seem like this is a discombobulated bison. So I'd like to see a little bit more to give me a little bit more of frame of reference to the image. Also, I would try to bring a little bit more of the shadows. There's lots of contrast here, which is not allowing me to see this eye of the calf, which I should be able to see. You should be able to bring some detail back into that image. Also on this fur, being so dark, kind of is distracting. I can't see the detail that I want to see in this image. I would try to bring in a little bit of those shadows and bring some of that detail. I give this image a 7. Talk about setting. This is absolutely beautiful setting with the Tetons in the background, this moose walking towards us. But again, remember what I talked about earlier. I'm always looking for images that are more kind of 45 degrees. I want the subjects to be walking towards me, but especially with ungulates, you don't necessarily want them walking straight towards you because they have the eyes to the side. So it doesn't provide for such a good connection between the viewer and the subject itself. So I would have liked to have seen it going more a little bit to the left, not so much looking towards us. But I like the fact that you had more room on the left. I think that works really nicely. We have some action by the fact that the legs are in motion. And you were shooting also kind of at eye level. So gives you that tighter connection with our subject. But you see what's happening here too. The fact that you're shooting straight at it, we can't make that good connection with the eyes because they are to the side. And then this ear is kind of merging with, this hump on the back of the moose itself. More of a 45-degree angle will give you more of almost like a profile shot, but not quite. I give this image a 7. Beautiful mountain goat, beautiful setting, beautiful background, gives you a sense of place, gives you, the conditions that these guys are in, the environment that they're in. I think this works very nicely. I think you could do a little bit more to, punch it up, give you a little bit more contrast in the frame, makes the whites a little whiter and the blacks a little blacker to give you a little bit more punch, create a little more separation between your subjects and the background. But I think the composition is absolutely spot on. It's beautiful. We have our subject, in more the rule of thirds, providing room for a subject to look into. We have a diagonal line that follows the eye, follows the motion of our subject, and an interesting background that gives us a really nice sense of place. Perhaps if it were me, I would crop in a tiny bit tighter so that I could see my subject a little bigger in the frame. But that's really, nitpicking. I give this image a 9. Really cool interaction here. Between this wolf and this grizz protecting its elk carcass. Absolutely, really, really cool interaction. You have even a raven in the shot for good measure. I think that, again, one of my challenges with this image is the fact that the part of the image where all of the action is taking place occupies only half of the image. You see how this horizon line or the shoreline is right through the middle of the image. We have this, water reflection, which is kind of neat, but really I want to see more about this interaction. I want to see more about the environment where this is taking place. So I don't necessarily need to see, dedicate half of the frame to this reflection. Maybe, a quarter of the frame would be more than enough. And being able to see more of what's going on up here, don't feel like I'm so tied into this absolutely amazing scene where you have this wolf licking its nose, kind of approaching the bear kind of eyeing that wolf and trying to safeguard its elk that is trying to cache. See how it's covered it with all the dirt, trying to cache it for consumption a little later on. Absolutely beautiful capture. I give this one an 8. Good interaction, good position. I love the fact that you were able to include a very shallow depth of field by getting down low and having the grasses go out and lose focus, as well as that background. But I have a hard time looking at the eye of our subject. Again, one of the most important things that we can do is make that connection between the viewer and the subject. I also like to see a little bit more detail here. There's a lot of contrast. I'm losing a lot of detail on both of our subjects, on both the cow and the calf as well. I like to bring a little bit more detail onto the frame and perhaps give yourself a little more room in the front. Right now, it feels like you're kind of same distance between the back of our subject and the front of our subject. I give this image a 7. Cool behavioral shot of a rough grouse. Again, following that rule of thirds, right now, if we look at the horizontal line of our image, we have the rough grouse and the berries, everything here kind of in the center of the frame, and you have all this space on at the bottom that's not really contributing all that much. Try to focus on your subject and what's most important on the image. This action of this rough grouse going out and trying to get those berries. So, perhaps doing a crop where you come in maybe a tiny bit tighter on the back and cut out the bottom here, and then cut maybe a little bit on the right to focus more on your subject and give that image a little bit more, a better flow than it has right now. By having your subject right there in the middle, it doesn't provide as much flow as it can by, removing a little bit of this superfluous part of the image that's not really adding all that much. You already have the environment in there. You don't need to have, dedicate that much of the frame to the environment. I would try to dedicate more of the frame to your subject. I give this image a 7. What an amazing light on this red fox. Absolutely beautiful light. Looks like, first light as it's coming up. And even though we're not looking at our subject, the subject is not looking at us, the fact that the light is flashing right in his face, we can see so much detail. We can see those eyes. We can see all the fur. We have beautiful depth of field where the nose, the eyes, the ears are all in focus, but you see how we start losing sharpness and focus on the back of our subject, giving you that sense of depth and dimension to the subject. We can see these claws on this fox, all so much detail, such a beautiful light. I love this image. We have this diagonal that makes us want to look and circle around as we look at this image. I think it absolutely beautiful, great cropping, great light. And this image is a 9. Wow, amazing, amazing action. I love the action that's going on. This big bear coming towards us, the snow flying as it's galloping towards us. Beautiful background. Again, I think that we could have a little bit more definition on our subject. I think the processing could do a little bit better in giving us a little bit more definition. Again, the bear looks a little bit washed out. You could bring a little bit more sharpness and definition to our subject. You see how this edge over here of our subject is kind of merging with the snow in the background. So by bringing a little more definition on our subject, we may be able to create a little bit more separation between the subject and the background. I love the fact that you had a fast shutter speed, but not super fast shutter speed. We get a little bit of motion blur on those paws, on those, on those extremities and on that snow, giving that base, that sense of motion. Oftentimes, when you have too much shutter speed and everything is frozen in time, to me, those kind of images feel like they're, frozen in time. I'd like to see a little bit of that motion on the frame, and you did a good job capturing that here. Beautiful shot. I'd work a little bit more on bringing out more definition on our subject and make it stand out more from that background. This image is an 8. I think I see what you're trying to capture here, but to me, our main subject, which is really the pronghorn, just seems so small in the frame that our eyes are just wandering so much around the frame. And the fact that we have these power lines going out in the distance and a nice diagonal line, which are very powerful compositional tools, is taking us away from our subject as opposed to taking us towards our subject. So not sure how you could have done this a little bit different, maybe by moving a little bit to the left and, having the power lines kind of lead you more towards your subject as opposed to lead you away from your subject would have made the image that much more compelling. To me, my subject, is, especially since this is, our theme here is wildlife, is the pronghorn. And the pronghorn just feels like in this image that it's, the tertiary actor, not even the primary or secondary actor in the scene. Power lines seem like the primary actor, the landscape seems like the secondary actor, and our pronghorn seems the tertiary actor. I give this image a 7. Nice capture of this nice rack on this bull elk. The title is After the Rut, and I think that's part of the reason we see this guy being a little scraggly and with some battle scars from fighting during the rut season. Beautiful capture, really nice light. I think that our crop is maybe a little bit too expensive, and these blues in the background seem a little bit oversaturated. This is what I kind of call Windex blue. This is not a blue that we normally see. I think it's just a little bit oversaturation on the blue. So I would try to dial down a little bit of saturation on the blue to make it look a little bit more natural than it does. But I think the pose is great. I think the connection we have with our subject is great. I think I want to be a little bit tighter on it to be able to have a stronger connection with my subject than I have here. But I love the depth of field, the detail that we see on the grasses, on the sagebrush, and on our subject is absolutely beautiful. Great example, great sample of a moose. Beautiful, beautiful animal. I give this one a 7. Very nice sub-adult bighorn sheep. Really good example of a sub-adult. Now, one of the challenges that we have, there are 2 challenges that I have with this image. One is that it doesn't seem to be tack sharp and focused. There seems to be a little bit of motion blur in this image, if I had to guess. I'm not sure that it's out of focus, or I think it's more motion blur, meaning your shutter speed was a little too low and there was a little bit of motion that is blurring the image a little bit. So that is one issue that I have with the image. The other one is that your depth of field is bringing in so much detail in the background that it's making it distracting. It doesn't allow me to see my subject as clearly as I would like to. So think about those 2 things. See if you have an image where you have a sharper subject than you have here, because right now the image is blurry and it's hard for me to kind of connect with my subject and see all the detail that I want to see on the horns and as well as on the fur of our subject. I gave this image a 6. Beautiful swan. I love the high key on this image. I think that, the fact that we lost some detail at the bottom of this image is, to me, is not as problematic as the one that we saw earlier with the snowy owl, because this is kind of conveying a different feeling altogether. This almost seems more angelic than anything else. Seems kind of more fantastical or fantasy like. So I like the fact that we're seeing this sort of feathering or fogginess to the bottom of our subject, yet we still have a lot of detail and texture and beautiful light on our subject. And the high key treatment here works very nicely. I think that, I guess, to be a little bit nitpicky, I give myself a little bit more room around the frame, especially here in the back, because if you were, again, to print this and frame it, with the mat is going to be cutting in so close to this back of the wings that it would be really uncomfortable. So I'd like to give myself a tiny bit more room around the edge, but it's absolutely beautiful image. I like it a lot. I'd give this an 8. Really cool action, talk about decisive moment. But at the end of the day, for me, it's a butt shot, right? We're missing some of the better parts of this brown pelican. I think the head and the face and the back have a lot more color and interest than the underside of the pelican. That's not the case with all birds, but with a brown pelican, that is definitely the case. Being able to see the colors of the face and the head, as well at the back. We can't make a really strong connection with our subject. The action here is absolutely stunning and beautiful. The fact that you got it within like a millimeter of the water, makes this image. But I think that it could have been so much better by trying to get a different angle. Again, we take what we can get, but to me, it's not strong enough to, because I don't have that connection with my subject. I'm losing that connection with my subject. I'm not seeing parts of the subject that I find are most interesting. But, kudos for capturing that moment. I gave this one image an 8. Looks like an Nhenga again, just like we saw earlier with that great blue heron. The action and the fact that we can see our subject so clearly, our prey so clearly. The biggest issue here is that our Nhenga is kind of looking away from us, right? So it's we don't have that strong connection with the eye, but this action is so interesting and so cool. That I think makes up for the fact that we cannot make that connection with our eye. And the one thing to me, knowing the behavior of these animals, that makes this so interesting is if you look at the tip of that beak, you see some blood there on the tip of the beak. And a lot of the rest of the world, they call what we call Nhengas, they call them darters, because these guys will go in and stab their victims. They, with that beak, they kind of dart in and skewer their victims. And then they sort of flip them up in the air to catch them in their mouth. And that's what's going on here. That's kind of the behavior that we're seeing. So I think the behavior, the impact, and the environment of this image is absolutely stunning and beautiful. The only problem that we have is that we can't make a strong connection with our subject. But otherwise, it's a beautiful, amazing image. I give this one an 8. I love this silhouette, and the fact that we can see all 4 extremities of our subject. We have, separation between the horns and the ears. Absolutely stunning. Turning this into black and white, I think, was, depending what the color of the sky was, probably the right decision. I love the negative space you gave it, because we have a lot of texture up here and gives us a more of a sense of place. I think it's absolutely stunning and beautiful. I think I would have liked to see a little bit more of the bottom, because it may be even a vertical. in this particular frame. Oftentimes what I like to do with bighorn sheep is kind of give a sense of place. And we know that bighorn sheep like to hang out in steep, rocky areas. And in order for me to convey that, oftentimes providing space at the bottom, showing this rock face, kind of gives you that sense of feeling of seeing that, the fact that it's perched high up on a sheer cliff, gives you that a stronger sense of place. But other than that, I think this image is beautiful and nicely captured. The pose is absolutely stunning on the subject. I give this image an 8. Great and very unusual capture of this bald eagle. I love that you capture what most people would consider, not such a great pose for an eagle. And I think the fact that this eagle was wet really adds to the pose that it's in. It makes it even more surreal and beautiful and attractive. And you can see, if you look closer, you can see that basically what it's doing is shaking its wings, trying to dry off a little bit. And you can see a lot of splatter of the wings. I like the fact that you have you got down low, you have a nice background to separate with. You don't have anything in the background that's interfering with our subject, and you didn't place him straight in the middle. You went a little bit to the left, still providing left. And nice crop and nice view of this eagle. I give this one a 9. Now talk about both, impact, composition, and technical on this one. This, you got texture everywhere. You didn't blow out any of the snow. You have texture all over the snow, yet we have this feeling of snow and cold, and we have connection with both polar bear cubs overlooking its mother. We have a nice diagonal going on. I mean, that's absolutely stunning. I love the feeling that we get of the snow cave that they're emerging from, or this day. Then obviously these guys are not just emerging from their winter den, but this is a den that they will typically use during the day or at night to rest. Absolutely stunning. I love the depth of field. You have, this area in the background that gives us a sense of place and depth. Yet we have both cubs and the mother nice and sharp. Beautiful shot. 9. Gets on a 9. Cool behavior in the burrowing owls. You see this top burrowing owl bringing in a grasshopper to the nest, I presume. The nest is down here, and this is, its mate, or probably a chick. It's kind of almost near fledgling, because you can see some of the downy feathers on the top of its wings. But I'd like to see this a little bit tighter, be able to see more of this fledgling down at the bottom, see more of the nest. So we don't necessarily need to have so much space down here, all this environment on the left-hand side. We have all that environment here. We don't necessarily need it over here. And zooming in a little bit, cropping in a little bit tighter, we'll be able to see a lot more of both of these subjects. Also, the fact that this wing is obscuring the vast majority of this subject is a little bit problematic. I'd like to be able to see a little bit more of the face and the head of this subject, of that the owl down on the ground. But I love the environmental shot. I love the behavioral shot of it bringing that grasshopper back to its nest. This one's an 8. Great, and this is a great environmental shot as well. And even though we have, there's a certain level of interest and behavior here. And with this bear cub looking straight at us, that the fact that the mama bear, that sow, is looking away from us is not, doesn't really detract from this image. I think it adds to the image, gives you a sense of behavior, that she's on the lookout for any danger that they may be in. I think the crop works really well. The fact that you have this lupins showing on the left-hand side, adds a little bit of interest and color. I like to see a little bit more detail. I think the processing, you could do a little bit better on the processing by bringing some detail onto our subject. Right now, this bear cub looks really, really dark. I see almost no detail in this area. And I know it's backlit, but you have this beautiful rim light on them, on both of them. But I still want to be able to see a little bit more detail on these guys, not have them just do a big amount of black darkness on that. I want to be able to see a little bit more of that fur, a little bit more detail. So make sure you expose those shadows a little bit better, a little bit higher. And this one's a 9. I'm sorry, an 8. I love this. We've had a lot of adult and calf interaction in this composition, which I absolutely love. The interaction is absolutely, great to capture, and not something that we can always witness. So I always feel, privileged when we're able to witness that. I love this interaction between this. It could be the father. It could be another sibling or part of the family, part of the pack or the herd, I should say. But I love the interaction between these two. I think that I wonder why it turned into black and white. It looks like you would have had some beautiful color in here as well with the grasses and the evergreen in the background. I do feel like I want to be able to have a little bit more room on both sides of the frame. This one is hard to figure out if you wanted to have more room on one side versus the other, because we're both looking in the opposite directions. And they're both beautiful interest subjects. They're both sharing the main actor role in this image. So maybe having an equal amount of space on both of them, from the rump down to the edge of the frame, but providing a little bit more room, especially on this one on the right, I think would improve that image. Great interaction, great shot. This is an 8. More Sandhill Cranes, and I love the texture and the color of the Sandhill Cranes. I think you missed focus on this one. You can see this back of this crane over here is really nice and sharp, but the heads of these two cranes are a little bit out of focus. Your depth of field, you had nice depth of field, but it didn't quite reach out to the face of this crane that's in the background. Also, the fact that this crane is looking away from us and it's going into the neck, and you have this sort of collision going on between the beak and the neck of this one is a little bit problematic. I give this image a 6. We have just 4 more images. So kind of neat interaction between these two subjects. I'm trying to figure out, what's going on here with the background and the high key. It looks like I'm losing a lot of detail in the image. It kind of looks kind of ethereal, but to the point where I'm not sure what it is that I'm looking for in the background. So, which is not always a bad thing. When someone starts questioning what they're looking at, it makes them look longer at the image, which is usually what we want. So you kind of wonder what the interaction is between these two. But to me, these posts and these lines are so overwhelming in the image that it kind of detracts from the interaction that these two may be having. These lines, keep competing for my attention as I try to figure out what is going on with our two subjects in the frame. I give this image a 6. Another bear eating berries. pretty cool. You know, and although it's not as cute as our cub eating the berries, I think this is a great behavioral shot on this bear coming in and just grabbing a complete mouthful of these berries. Again, during, in the wet environment, bringing a lot of texture and detail. I think that, my biggest problem with this is how prominent this foreground vegetation is, to the point where it's distracting us some. So I would try to minimize that a little bit by perhaps darkening some of these bright areas on that foreground vegetation, because those are competing a lot for my attention. But I love the action, the action that we're seeing here with this bear coming after the berries, the detail, the fact that we can see into the eye, and the nice depth of field that we have on our subject. We can see how sharp the snout and the eyes are, and we start losing a little bit of that depth of field as we get to the back of our subject. This one's an 8. Another amazing polar bear image. I love the environmental shot. I just think that maybe, from an impact, from a first glance impact perspective, I think we may be better off cropping in some and making that bear a little bit more bigger in the frame. I know that one of the things that you may be trying to convey here is, the fact that the bear is getting a little bit lost in the environment, because we have white on white. But I think that from a viewer perspective, being able to see a little bit more of that bear, the fact that it's looking straight at us, adds a lot of that, to create that connection between our viewer and the subject. But, we, for example, don't need to have all of this snow in the foreground, all this ice in the foreground. I would concentrate on this part of the snow, because we have these beautiful vetting with minerals in that ice, and maybe crop in a little bit to bring out that bear and give us a little bit more view into that bear, while still retaining that amazing environment that it's in. Amazing image, beautiful image. This is a 9. And for some reason, this is not showing me the last image in the bunch. There we go. Another great gray owl and an amazing capture. This is not an easy shot to make. I've shot great gray owls many, many, many times, getting them flying straight towards us, having a fast autofocus system that can get those eyes in focus as they're flying towards you is incredibly difficult, and also in getting them, still in the frame as they're flying towards us. This is, technically a perfect image. I love the connection that we have with those eyes, those bright yellow eyes that seem like they're piercing right into your soul. Perhaps I may want to bring a little bit more detail in the shadows, and especially in the face area, in this eye that's more in the shadow than the one on the right, but that's really nitpicking. I give this image a 9. And David, I think that is our last image. I am turning it back to you.
Oh, great job, Juan. I really enjoyed the critiques. I hope everyone else did. So I know we got a lot of people on the East Coast, and we had a lot of photos. So I'm going to jump into showing everyone the winners, and then we can open it up for some questions. But I know Juan, at least, and several other people are on the East Coast, and it's getting late. So pardon me for hurrying. So we're going to go and start, I guess, immediately at the level 1. And if y'all bear with me just a second here. So our honorable mention, our first one, is this, folks. This shot, the bison, George Beller. I think George is online with us. Do you want to tell us where you shot this? He was there. You may have to unmute, George. I don't know where he is.
Maybe not.
Or maybe a technical difficulty. So, but congratulations to him. So let's, our second honorable mention is Gigi Halloran, and I don't think she's online tonight. I didn't see her sign in, but that was the Loons. And again, I don't think she's online. If anybody has any comments or anything, but jump in. Third place was the Berry Bear, Dan Orr. I think Dan's still here. Are you there, Dan?
I'm here.
Yeah, great shot. Where did you shoot this?
That was taken in Yellowstone, just about a mile from the entrance to the petrified tree.
Cool.
Wow.
But when was that? Was that this year?
That was last year.
Last year. Yeah, I photographed those bears as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
There was a mother and two cubs.
Yeah, that's right. I got them up on trees and all sorts of stuff right in that area.
That's a wonderful capture. I agree with.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a better shot than I got.
Thank you.
All right, so that was our third place. Second place here for level 1, Dan Orr again. So for your Bighorn ram.
Yeah, that was actually just north of Gardner, Montana,
Oh, okay.
Very cool.
just outside of Yellowstone.
And our first place, I don't think Farishti is online, so we'll have to get a hold of her. But yeah, I love the color in this. And
Yeah, absolutely stunning. The fact that she got the sun hitting those feathers the way she got them is absolutely beautiful.
yeah. So oh, we're missing a number of our winners right here. But anyhow, we'll move on. Give me just a second. We'll get over to the level 2 winners. Oops, sorry. Our first honorable mention here is Patty Bachman. She was here earlier also, but I don't think I see her right now. A lot of people dropping off. It must be getting too late for folks. So great fox picture though.
Beautiful fox.
Yeah. And our other honorable mention, excuse me, was yeah, Lewis Brad, the polar bear shot. I agree. I love the color in this, and it's so lonesome and lonely feeling. And I know
I love the fact that it's looking straight at us too.
Yeah, and I know Lewis and Candy are out of town, and so I didn't expect to see them tonight. We'll have to get a hold of them about getting an award here. And then Lewis also gets third place for his owl shot. I have to say I'm real envious of this. I keep trying to get good great gray owl shots, and they're not very good, but this one is spectacular.
Yeah, getting them in flight like that, flying towards you is, you know, very, very challenging.
Second, David Morgan, are you still online?
Yeah, I'm up here. Thank you. Appreciate the award, and a mother and a cub in Katmai. I was really lucky. We had this whole afternoon together, and we just watched them play and interact, and was really awesome.
Very cool. Beautiful, beautiful shot.
Thank you very much.
And first place went to Candy Brad. And like I said, Candy and Lewis, I think, are out of town, but I'm assuming they captured these polar bear shots on that their visit to the Arctic where they're going to talk about next week in the Pure Mentor group. So yeah, spectacular shot. With being able to see all three of them like that is really great.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible shot. Being able to, like you said, just being able to see them and having those two cubs looking straight at them is absolutely beautiful.
So again, I know it's getting late and a couple of our winners aren't online with us right now, but I want to say to everybody who submitted something, we had some fantastic photos and it was great to get over 100 submissions. Like I said, if you have any comments you want to send in the chat, just put it to me privately and we'll take that as input for next time. But I really want to thank Juan and Jackie for all their cooperation in getting this done. So, and if y'all have any questions, now's our time before I know it's getting late for a lot of people, but if you do have a question, let us know, pop up now.
Where can we view this recording? Because I missed the first half.
You know, I'll get it online in the next couple of days. And when we do that, we put the link for YouTube on the website, and I'll also send it out in the next newsletter.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, this is the quietest group I've ever heard.
No kidding.
We're usually pretty chatty. It must be getting late. So, Juan, thank you very much. And let's see, hang on a second. We're getting a lot of things in the chat. Thank you, Juan. And like I said, great job. I love the critiques. Very precise and to the point. So I hope everybody got a lot out of that.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well,
And I look forward to see some of you guys again in Yellowstone this winter.
Yeah, it was great meeting you up there, and maybe we can get some of the people on one of your trips at some point. So, and if you're in
Sounds good.
Jackson, yeah, if you're in
Yes.
Jackson, please,
I will be.
feel free to
Yeah.
call or let us know and maybe grab a drink or something.
Absolutely.
Sounds great.
I'll be there in January next year.
Oh, cool. So, well, wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. It was really nice to meet you all too, and we hope to see you at some of our future workshops. Juan and I did want to mention before we closed out too that we have a series of workshops for 2023 that we're going to be releasing in the next few weeks. So if y'all are interested in learning, some of those locations are Botswana, Cuba, Costa Rica, and 2 locations in Alaska. So you can email me if you guys would like to also get on those wait lists for that.
Yeah.
My email is info@juanpons.org.
It's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you,
Coach,
folks. Hope you all have a good night.
Thank you, guys. And I will get in
Thanks for
touch
the
with all.
invitation.
I'll get in touch with all the winners about how you get your awards. So,
Okay.
all right. Well,
Beautiful.
we'll let
Take
Have
care.
a good one. Good
All
night.
right. Thanks.
Good night.
Till next time. Thanks.